Right. Hi guys. I just got back from 6 weeks in Northeast India, so hence the lack of uploads and updates here. I thought I'd get back to you today with something that's pretty close to my heart and something that I did do while I was away, which is using wide-angle lenses for portraiture. You know, when I first got into photography, people would always try and tell me that you have to have a portrait lens. It has to be 85 millimeters, 135 millimeters. You always want to flatter a person. You want to have that nice creamy background so you can just focus on the person. But when you actually get into it and start trying to maybe tell a slightly different story, a wide angle lens can be really, really good for portraiture. You don't always need to 100% flatter that person. You might want to try and express them in a different way, put your stamp on the image. And I find that wide angle lenses can be a really good way of doing that. So, and again, when I started, people would say to me, "Oh, a wide angle lens is just a lens to get more stuff in. You don't have to step back. You can just sort of have it all in there." But the reality is, if you want to use that lens for other purposes, you can. And so today, one of those things that I'm going to do is sort of run you through that. Wide angle lenses. I mean, if you think about the properties of what they do, basically they exaggerate the way we normally see things with our eyes. They make them, you know, you get a wider perspective. Your lines start to converge a little more. You see those shots where you get the lens down close to a railroad and the two lines converge into infinity and things like that. Wide angle lens is really good for that sort of stuff. It is also really good for getting stuff in. If you get up close to your subject, it makes it a little bigger in the frame, but it also still has that wide angle field of view, and so you end up seeing a lot more of a background as well. So if you start to think about those properties, wide angle lenses can become quite useful for portraiture as well. So the image that I have up here first, this is a train repairman in Yangon, Myanmar, and this is shot with the Fujifilm 90mm f2. Now that's a typical portrait lens. That's your 135mm on full frame. So it's basically, that is the full frame portrait lens. But what you can see here is you've got him, and you've got the train here that you can see a little bit of. You've got that nice narrow depth of field. But if I flick to the next image, which is shot with a 16mm or a 24 on full frame, this to me is a much better photograph of him and who he is. It includes more of the train, more of the background. We're really close to him, so we get that kind of intimate feel. We start to know a little bit more about this person, I feel, when using a lens like that. We also get the use of the lines coming in to kind of converge around him. So personally, I find that in this situation, this sort of environmental portrait, this is a much more effective way to express this person. Another time when I have used that was just on my recent trip actually to Northeast India. I was photographing this man here. He's a shaman for the Apatani people in Northeast India, and I started out making a representation of this man. This is the Fujifilm 63mm f2.8 on the GFX, and this is sort of your normal lens, your 50mm on full frame here. And so it's a good record of him. We've got very straight lines and nothing's distorted. Perspective is as it should be. But I found that, this man is a little bit larger than life, and I wanted to kind of express that. So what I did was I switched out for the 23mm f4, which is about an 18 on full frame, and I end up with something like this. You'll see me, lying down on the ground there, looking up at him, and yeah, it makes his hands a little disproportionately large, and his face gets a little smaller. We include a bit more of the background. The goal wasn't to flatter him. The goal was to make him sort of that bigger character that he is, and so that's sort of why I chose that lens on this image. And it also, by lying down and kind of looking up at him, I'm able to have my flash here and keep it out of the frame as well. So, the wide lens has these properties where it's sort of things that get closer to the camera, they get larger, lines kind of converge, things like that. If you want to create a wide angle frame with the properties of a telephoto lens, there's a way to do that. And I believe it's called the Brenizer method. It's sort of been named after a guy called Ryan Brenizer who did a whole lot of this stuff. He would extend to give his pictures this sort of medium format, quote, quote, medium format feel, where he would use a shallow depth of field and then stitch multiple frames together of a very, very shallow depth of field to give this sort of medium format feel. And you can actually use that, let's go to the next image, to extend a frame around a person. So the initial shot here is just the girl. It's just this piece here. But I've shot a whole lot of frames around it to get the whole scene in around her. And you can see that what that does with a longer lens is it brings the scene together a little bit. It's a little bit flatter than it would be with a wide angle lens, but it also makes the subject a lot smaller as well. If we use a wide angle lens, we're able to physically get closer to that person and get the same basic framing and the same amount of stuff in the frame, but we're able to keep her being quite large. So this is the Fujifilm 16mm 1.4, this one is the 56mm 1.2. So I was able to stitch all of this together. And I'll show you in the next frame kind of how that's done. So this is the first frame of a hunter that I shot up in Nagaland in northeast India. And as you can see, my flash is still in the picture. I wasn't particularly worried about it. I just needed enough power during the middle of the day to be able to light him up. So this is my first frame, and then I moved the flash out and I shot all around to get that wide angle field of view, but with a longer lens. This is the 110mm f2 on the GFX, so about an 85mm on full frame, give or take. And this allowed me to keep that narrow depth of field, pull him off the background, but also include the full background. So this is the final image. Now, if I'd shot this with a wide-angle lens, I wouldn't have had these pieces of grass on the side. I would have been much closer to him, but I would have also been blocking a fair bit of what's back here with him, and I felt like this is one of the scenes where I wanted to kind of extend it. So that's kind of two ways to create wide-angle portraits. One, using a wide-angle lens if you want to bring the lines in and really, really show that scene and get sort of really up close and intimate with a person. And two, using a stitching method if you want to kind of make a flatter sort of image. So thanks for watching, guys. Please, questions, comments down below. Would appreciate that. Like and subscribe if you want to. And we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.